morning, Roxy Soxy.
Good morning, Tam. How's
What
it going?
a hell of a week,
I mean,
might I tell you.
Oh my God. I can't even believe that you're like so strong. You are holding it together.
Don't make me cry. Don't make me
You
cry.
are,
Don't make me cry.
though. You are.
I don't think I'm holding it together. The funny thing is, for the first 7 days, I actually think I went into this shutdown mode where I just kept going and going and going. And, you know, my husband was okay. He has COVID, which we talked about in the last show. And for the first 7 days, it wasn't so bad. So I just had to take care of the kids and take care of him. And I was okay with that. And then on the weekend, everything changed and I got really afraid. And I just kept blinders on and I just kept going for the kids and for him. But then, you know, it got so bad by Tuesday that I thought that I might never see him again. And then by Wednesday, which was yesterday, it actually got to a better position. And all day yesterday, I was a mess because I think there was such PTSD and I was trying to keep it together for everyone. And then when you relax, your body just, lets it all out. So,
yeah. And I mean, I think too with COVID, like we were talking about this last week, one day can be great. The next day,
so
changes
scary.
and it's up and down. And so I can tell that you've been living on the edge now for almost 2 weeks,
I know, and you've been amazing. And the thing is, I didn't even want to do a podcast, but then I thought, thank God we're doing a podcast with the person we're doing a podcast with. Because if we were supposed to be doing a podcast with a comedian, I'd be like, I can't do this. I have no jokes up my sleeve.
This is like
and last night,
session you will ever
I know. I was like, this is great because I can't get into her, even though she's like 2 hours away from me. So this woman is someone that I was talking about to you before, Roxy, that I would like literally be in the bathtub at nighttime because I've struggled with anxiety and emotional issues like my whole life. And she's just helped me so much. She has this new book called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which is like my whole life is a mess. So please, 5 simple, scientifically proven, steps to reduce anxiety. It's 5 steps. I was like, if I'd known it was only 5 freaking steps, I would have done it a long time ago and would saved a lot more money. Her name is Caroline Leaf. She's a cognitive neuroscientist and communication pathologist. And welcome so much. Welcome to Women on Top today.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you both. I really appreciate it. Thank you for that lovely intro.
So fix us.
Exactly.
I wish I could. I think I wrote the book for me more than anyone else. One thing we need to realize, if you're human, you're a mess. And that is okay. And that is really the main message that I bring through in all my work. I mean, I've been in this field for 38 years. I'm a scientist. I'm a researcher. I've been a clinical therapist for 25 of those 38 years. And I honestly can say if you're a human and you're alive, you're a mental mess. And that's why my podcast is called Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and why my most recent book, which is about to be released on the 2nd of March. And it's really the fact that we live on a continuum of life. And, the way I love to explain it, which is very sort of manageable and understandable, is if you think of a continuum and in the middle is 0, and on the one side it goes from 1 to 10, and the other side it goes from -1 to -10. And then if you think of there's a bell curve, and the bell curve is around the -4 to +4. In any one day, we as humans hover in the -4 +4 zone. And that's going from breaking into tears, getting totally frustrated, having a fight, getting depressed, getting worked up, to having a great discussion, a great moment, wanting to give up, very excited, and up and down. And that's so normal and so human and so much part of our narrative. And then there'll be things in our life that will shoot us into the +10, where there's something ecstatic and an amazing situation, but it doesn't last for long. But you can grab onto that and you can wire that into your psyche and your brain to help you to cope with the difficult times. And then there's times where we have such a lot of trauma that we slip down to the 7, 8, 9, -7, 8, 9, 10, and we can have psychotic breaks and things like bipolar and schizophrenia. And I say those words because they're not illnesses. They're not its. They're simply descriptions. They are symptoms of an underlying issue. Depression is not an illness. It's not an it. Anxiety is not a neuropsychiatric brain disease. Bipolar is not a neuropsychiatric brain disease. Schizophrenia is not a neuropsychiatric brain disease. These scary words are not brain diseases. They are, your brain will respond, and we can talk about that as we're going on, but they are basically symptoms, warning signals, alarms that something is going on in your life that you need to pay attention to. And we need to do that we need to manage our mind, and we also need to do that with the support of each other. Like you said, you two have helped each other so much through this past couple of weeks, and with your husband having COVID and so on, we need each other. So really, if we can just level the playing fields, that's one of the first things that we need to do. Just because I'm in mental health and I'm a scientist and I've researched it for 38 years doesn't mean I've got it all together. Anyone who says they have, they're lying. And we up and down all the time. I mean, we have issues going on all the time. And we know that, but we act like it's so strange to have something going on. And then it's immediately, and unfortunately, I've watched this in my trajectory of my career. I've watched how 30, 40 years ago, we looked at the person and their story. And we used to work with a team. So if someone came to my practice, or we worked in wherever I worked, different places, we never just had a list of symptoms and diagnose. We actually worked with a whole team of professionals. But the most important person in that team was the actual person battling and their family. And we would listen to their story. Then it shifted as we got more into the brain. And I mean, I'm a neuroscientist. I've studied the brain, and I've even got one on my table here. The brain for years, 38 years now. And as we've learned more about the brain, so we've become, as a society and as a medical world, we've become more neuroreductionistic. And everything's come down to finding this elusive reason why I'm depressed in my brain. So my brain made me do it, has become the language. And it's one of the worst things we could have done. And I talk about that in my book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. I talk about how the mental health system has actually made us sicker and more mentally unhealthy. And it hasn't helped. And fortunately, there are a large group of us now that are fighting against that. But it's the whole thing of, you've got depression, here's a symptom checklist, let's give you a diagnosis, let's give you a label. Let's say there's three of us talking now. Let's say all of us have depression. Does that mean that we're all ill with the same thing? Absolutely not. If you're depressed, it's because your husband's got COVID and he was close to potentially dying. I'm depressed maybe because of whatever. You're depressed because of whatever. So in other words, you can't tell us we've got one disease. There's no depression in my brain waiting to jump out and in your brain in the same place. And that's how ridiculous it's got. They're looking for the neurobiological correlates, saying your depression is because you've got something wrong with your brain. That has come from the biomedical neuroreductionistic model, which works beautifully. And I've got all these props to help us for the brain and the body. It works beautifully for the physical. Like if you've got cardiovascular issues or immune deficiency or problems with your brain or whatever, neurologically with brain injury or something, but it does not work for your mind. Your mind is not your brain. Your mind is separate from your brain. They're two different things. They work together. They're separate but inseparable, but we can't paint them with the same brush. And that's the mistake we've made. And we see the evidence, because between 1998 and 2014, we saw a change in a trend. And that trend is, as technology and medicine advanced, as our understanding of the brain advanced, our understanding of mind went backwards. So in other words, we are actually worse off now mentally, mind-wise, than we were before. So for decades, people have been living longer because of advances, but this trend reversed. By 2014, it had completely reversed. We're now in a reverse trend where people are dying 8 to 25 years younger than they should be, and because of preventable lifestyle issues based on how we manage our mind. And no one talks about this. I don't hear anyone talking about this. It's one of the biggest pandemics that we currently have in our current era. And people are not, all we're talking about is, there's a mental health problem, we've got to diagnose more and give more medication. That is the reason why people are getting sick. If we say people are going through a pandemic, we're obviously going to be depressed and anxious. It doesn't mean you have a brain disease. It means that you're having a normal response to adverse circumstances. And in history, from the beginning of time, whenever that was, when humans are going through adverse circumstances, they will respond with their mind and it will affect their body. And we've got to stop saying it's a disease. You've got to start treating the whole person and recognizing the narrative. Sorry, I gave you a whole mouthful there.
Is depression or anxiety, this is one of the questions I'd written for later, but it seems to work for what you were saying. Is it learned behavior, or is it something that you can be predisposed to? Like if you come from a family member who has severe depression or bipolar or anxiety disorder, does that mean that you're more susceptible to have that mental, I guess it's called a mental illness, is it? Are you more predisposed to it because of that?
A good question. First of all, what we need to do is change the narrative. It's not a mental illness.
Okay, what's it called?
Depression is not anything. It's not an it. It's very real, but it's not an it. It's a symptom. It's not a behavior. It's not a illness. An illness. It's not like diabetes or cardiovascular disease, which is the message we've been told, which is what's causing people to die younger. What it is it's a symptom. If you get angry, it doesn't mean you have a disease of anger. If you get frustrated, it doesn't mean you have a disease of frustration. Illness and depression is on a par with depression and anger and frustration. So what we need to see is depression is a symptom. It's a descriptive word that is a symptom where you feel down and sad, etc. But it's a warning signal. There's a reason behind it. So it's not an illness. Sorry, it is a symptom of an underlying cause. So that's the very first part of that answer. In terms of it being a learned behavior, it's not a behavior. So you don't learn depression. It's a response. It's a response to some kind of a situation, something that's going on in your life. Maybe it's a trauma that you had very young and it's going on and you've suppressed it and it's been triggered by whatever, or you're going through like whatever, COVID, financial, whatever, political, racism. There's a million trillion different reasons why people can feel depressed, but we've got to get away from the narrative that it's an illness that you've got. It is a response. So it's not an illness, it's a response to an underlying. In terms of like if it is there a genetic component, there's no research saying that it's genetic. They've spent billions of dollars for the last 50 years trying to prove that it's got a genetic origin and that it's got a brain and neurobiological correlate. So as I said earlier on, like jumping out of your brain. They've never been able to show that because it isn't like that. It isn't something that's in your brain. What does happen is you can be in a family where where a child sees a mother or a father who's very depressed. So they're seeing that behavior. And that's the result. That parent is depressed because of whatever. It's a symptom of an underlying issue. And let's say that they never deal with that. That is a very real. Here's another prop. This is
oh my gosh, that's an interesting prop.
Yeah. So this movie set.
Looks like my dustbuster gone wrong in the fire.
I know it does. So this is I know that's a good description. This is a toxic thought versus this is a healthy thought. Okay. So, and we'll talk more about how they form and all that in a moment, but essentially a toxic thought, this could be anything that's happened to anyone, anything that we experience is built into the brain. If it's toxic, if it's an adverse experience of any sort, it'll be built into the brain in an abnormal format, but it's built into the brain. That then causes the brain and the body to respond because your body's trying to get rid of this. Like it treats it like it's a virus, like a COVID. It'll fight it. Your body fights this, and in fighting that, you get all these signals, and some of the signals are things like the depression, anxiety, etc. So those are warning signals that something's going on. If you don't deal with this ever as a parent, it goes through the sperm and the ova, and it passes to the next generation, and it passes down through generations. It's called epigenetics, but it goes through dormant. It's not a genetic thing. There's not a genetic fault. It's a mutation that goes, because this is all wired into the genes. So it goes through as like baggage, and it passes through, but it's dormant, it's asleep. It can be activated. So what it does is it creates what we call an epigenetic proclivity. So in other words, there's the potential that it could be triggered and activated. But you can go through life with a whole bunch of these, and we've all got a whole bunch of different stuff from our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, and we maybe some of them get triggered and activated. Some of them they just go away because you just don't think like that, or you don't get triggered, or if you do, you manage it. In other words, it doesn't mean if you've got this that's it. You've got this genetic illness and that's it for the rest of your life. That's the message that we've been told, but it's not science. It's an easy message to sell. It's an easy message to medicate, but it's not, and it's an easy message to sort of put in a box like you can with cardiovascular disease or immune disease or any biological disease. But this proclivity, then, if it's in your family, yes, there is, if you've grown up seeing depression and if you've got this in your genes, it's there dormant. So there's a proclivity, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily are going to get depression. It's very much dependent on what you do with this. So you can decide, okay, I can see it's happening to me, and you can start managing it. But let me stop there and you can ask some questions and I can explain it in more detail with all my little props and things.
Oh, I love the props.
Yes, I know. So good. Going back to the toxicity point that you were making about these thoughts, I think like you're saying, they can be, multi-generational and happen over and over again. And then you can also see things, for example, on TV, like, for example, what happened this past weekend
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Washington, D.C. And those can trigger these very toxic thoughts. And then you get sucked up sort of into the news cycle, and you're seeing this person talk about this and this and that, and it just builds and it builds and it builds. So what is the best way to take that, like all that toxicity in there, and channel it into something more, or just to even just get rid of the toxicity?
Well, it's an excellent question, and yes, we're immersed in that. And every generation is always immersed in something. So our generation happens to be immersed in racism, political chaos, and this global disease that for the first time humanity is facing the same common enemy, which is interesting. So we're in a very interesting time. But if we go back to 10 years ago, they were facing something, and 20 years ago, and 100 years ago. So every generation is immersed in life, and life is experienced by humans. And how do we experience it? Through our mind. And what is our mind, and what is our brain, and what's the role of both? So to answer your question, the first part is that every generation is going through something. Ours happens to be X. And the second thing is we need to understand what the mind is and what the brain is. That understanding, well, we can unpack that in a very simple way, then will give you the answer, which is mind management. We need to manage our mind. So if I can unpack that very simplistically, is that okay? Can I unpack it? Okay, so I'm going to unpack the difference between mind and brain, and then move into answering what mind management is. So we use the word mind and brain interchangeably, and that's wrong, okay, because the mind is not the brain. But because of the last 50 years, especially the last 30 years of the focus on the brain has become an obsession. Everything is brain. My brain made me do it. My whatever is the kind of, so it's, and I mentioned that's neuroreductionism. But the brain is a physical substance. If you're dead, your brain's not going to be alive anymore. Your brain's going to disintegrate. No matter how much we try and keep it alive, you can't. Okay. So in other words, what's keeping it alive? You're alive. So what are you? You are your mind. What is mind? It's your unique way that you think, feel, and choose. Because what are you doing as a human? What are you doing right now? You're listening, and you're seeing, and you're thinking about what I'm telling you. You've been thinking this whole time. In fact, you never don't think. You can go 3 weeks without food. You can go 3 days without water. You can go 3 minutes without oxygen, but you cannot even go 3 seconds without using your mind. So your mind is the thing that drives you as a human. And if you get that, then you can start unpacking all the rest of it. So just responding to the news, responding to the situation with COVID, responding to what happened last Wednesday, responding to how they're managing it, responding to what's going on in the world, racism, responding just to waking up in the morning and your kids are screaming at you, the cereal's on the floor, your husband's better or not better, you get a text from some life. It's all every experience you receive as you wake up in the morning, you process it through your thinking, feeling, and choosing. So you are always thinking, feeling, and choosing. There isn't a millisecond that you're not thinking, feeling, and choosing. And that's mind. Mind is those 3 things. You think, when you think, you feel. When you think and feel, you choose. So those 3 things are happening all the time at 400 billion actions and faster in your non-conscious mind. You're consciously aware of your thinking, feeling, and choosing more or less every 10 seconds. And we can train ourselves to be conscious of our consciousness. We can train ourselves to be conscious of how we are thinking, feeling, and choosing. It's a skill. It's a malleable skill, and it's a skill we should be training our kids, and it's a skill we should be training ourselves, and it's a skill you spend your entire life developing. Mind, and that's basically mind management. It's managing how you think, feel, and choose every 10 seconds. Now, that may sound like a tall order.
But how do you do that? I'm sorry to interrupt. Like you say,
no.
I can tell that you're the kind of person that wakes up in the morning, and if there's a negative thought, you're able to change that thought. I don't think I'm able to do that. Like I wake up and I go, oh fuck, excuse my French, I have to do this again. I have to do this again and clean and homeschool and feed, and like I don't know how to be positive about that experience, although I'm grateful because I love my family, but I don't know how to feel positive. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I'm just
No,
like,
no,
how
no,
do
no.
you do it?
I'm
like,
glad.
tell me.
Yeah,
I'm glad you interrupted, because I may look like I got it all together, but there's a mental mess in my head too. I mean, I just woke up it was yesterday morning I woke up, and within 5 minutes I was in this mood of going from being so happy to totally flustered, and I was worrying about a whole bunch of stuff, and it literally affected how I was functioning. But the difference now is that in the past I would have spiraled and I would have stayed a mental mess. I now, from the scientific research that I have done, and I apply this. So I'll forget, ended up getting so worked up. I went to, I go to a workout every day. I do a fasted workout every single day. And I went to my fasted workout with my daughter, because she works out, well, my kids will work out, but I happen to be with just one of my daughters. And she said something to me and it triggered me. And I ended up having this argument with her in the car. And here's us together to person. I was such a mess. And this was within, like, I woke up, like, this is in a 30-minute period. Now I know what to do. I know how to get it under control, but it took me 30 minutes of getting more and more of a mess and then I got on that treadmill and I was so full of energy, both stormed out of the car onto the treadmill in Orange Theory and like started pounding that treadmill. And normally I'd be exhausted because it was a really hard workout that day. I was just pounding it through. But what I did was I knew how to bring myself back. Yes, it took me 30 minutes, but and sometimes it takes me 5 minutes and sometimes 5 seconds and sometimes 3 hours. But the difference is I know what to do. And the difference is that as I apply a scientist mind to everything, and that's what I'm trying to help people do. And that's why I wrote this book. And that's why I put my clinical trials in this book, that everything I do is science. It's got a base. It comes from my heart, what I need, what my kids need, what my patients needed, and what I see missing from the world of mental health and the world of therapy and the world of life. That who's teaching us that it's okay to have a crazy mess in your head and what to do about it? No one. All we're being told is you get a diagnosis, you get a label, you got to go to therapy for 5,000 years, and things just don't seem to, and then you've got to get up the next day and do the same old thing. And how do you get, okay, so I decided years ago, what do you do? So I wanted to understand mind. What is thinking, feeling, and choosing? What does it do? And how do I influence it? So that's why that's where I developed the 5 steps from. The 5 steps are so simple, but they are based on 38 years of profound science, clinical trials, thousands of patients, thousands of hours of work. So when I say them so simplistically, I want to stress the scientific side. I don't teach woo-woo wellness. I teach hardcore scientific fact that when you do this, this is going to happen in your brain. This is going to happen in your body. This is going to happen in your mind. So I'm going to give you the big picture of the 5 steps and then backtrack to the mind-brain definition. Okay. So just very quickly, mind is how you think, feel, and choose. You do that all the time. You never at night, during the day, you think, feel, and choose to build thoughts. At night time, you are sorting out the thoughts that you build. So you're still thinking, feeling, and choosing even at night, which is why you dream. You're preparing for the next day. So if you always thinking, feeling, and choosing, which is always changing your brain's never the same. That's neuroplasticity. Then my argument is, how do we direct that process? And that's where the 5 steps were birthed out of. 38 years of research in trying to work out what is mind and how do you control it? What is thought? What is memory? What is this negative and positive thinking? And how do I get out of this mental mess? What did I do on the treadmill? I apply those 5 steps. Okay. So the 5 steps are, we've got to be aware. We've got to embrace. It's not just being aware. It's not just meditation, mindfulness, whatever. That when that's decontextualized, it actually makes you worse. That's what the science shows. You can't just be aware and think, oh, now I'm aware of my body and everything. That's not enough. You can't decontextualize it out of its whole Eastern philosophy. And that's what people have done. And the science shows it's actually caused more problems than good. So I'm not talking about that awareness. I am talking about it and embracing. Like you embrace your kids, you embrace your husband, you embrace what you are feeling. I embraced my anger, my frustration, my irritation, my snapping at my daughter, the argument that we had. I embraced my unreasonableness as I got onto that treadmill. The first thing I do though is I recognized my energy, toxic energy. I was totally frustrated and I channeled it into exercise. In that exercise, I immediately, within 2 minutes of the treadmill, I had started calming down. I also immediately got oxygen in my brain and I did what I call the 10-second pause. This is a foolproof breathing exercise that will calm you down when you want to kill your family or you want to throw
every
the
damn
towel
day,
in.
especially in quarantine.
Exactly. And when you just say, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here forever, you're never going to see me again. When you're feeling like that or someone says something to you, you just like, this is it. This 10-second pause is a fail-proof way of calming you down. What it is and I did this on the treadmill while I was running, so I was channeling into exercise. So movement is great. You don't have to get on a treadmill. You can jump up and down. You can drop to the floor and do press-ups. You can run up and down your stairs. But when you're feeling that total burst where you can't cope, do some movement, because it will take that toxic energy, which I will show with images in a moment, and it will transfer it. Energy is never lost. Energy is transferred. So you can control where energy goes. So in a high state of stress and negativity, transfer the energy, move, then breathe. As you move, like you're breathing anyway, but move and then do this exercise, 10-second pause. So you breathe in for 3 and then you breathe out for 7. And you do that 6 to 9 times and more if you need to. As you breathe in, so in 2, 3, and then out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, you increase your decision-making capability. That's powerful. I'm going to say it again. Your ability to make decisions in a reasonable way will improve. Why? Because you're pushing oxygen to the front part of your brain. The front part of your brain, when you're conscious and awake and in the midst of that negativity, the argument, the whatever, the energy becomes very, you get too much what we call high beta energy. You get little red spots across this part of the brain, which means it's like a tsunami in your brain. And your mind is using your brain, because your mind is how you think, feel, and choose. And it's this energy, this quantum energy that is you, that you push through your brain. And if you're pushing this messy quantum energy through your brain becomes a mess. Your response of your brain will respond, and you get these crazy, think of just like rapids or something. That's what happens in the front of your brain. That drops oxygen, drops blood flow, and you get little holes in the front of your brain. If we had to do different types of scanning, when you like that, you then become reactive and impulsive. You don't become a responder. You become a reactor, and an impulsive reactor. That's when you will say the worst things and you'll do the most stupid things.
Oh my gosh,
So
that's me. Oh my gosh.
it's all of us. It's all of us.
See, do you
it's
say
all
the
of
horrible
us.
things?
Yeah, that, oh my God, horrible things. I'm especially my partner, like my husband,
I say
it's
such
like,
horrible things.
it's
I know.
And if he says you're being a witch, I'm like, you said what?
Yeah, you can never say that.
You can't say I'm
Exactly.
being anything.
Right?
Yeah.
So we need to embrace that. We need to, that's the first step. So you need to embrace, I'm feeling like a this or that or whatever. We mustn't be scared of that. You see, shift your perspective. We think it's so bad. We run ourselves, we laugh and run ourselves down. But no, that's being human. It's okay to lose your cool, but then you need to bring it back again. So listen to what I'm saying. Don't see them as negative, those negative reactions as bad and terrible. You evil and you're this terrible person. See them as, oh gosh, okay, that's not the best reaction, but I embrace it. I bring it into my fold. I gather awareness of it, and then I move and I breathe in this way, because then I'm going to increase my ability of my brain to allow energy to flow through. And my mind has to use my brain. So this brain's going wonky because of the mess, I can't use my brain properly. So get control back. And if you say, oh gosh, this is so terrible, I'm so bad, this is so bad, and you see it as bad, you then throw 1,400 neurophysiological responses into disarray, and now your body's working against you. You've dropped the oxygen, the blood flow, all these things are going wrong, not only there in your heart, every cell of your body is affected. So in our current Western culture, we are trained to see all that as bad. And depression, everything is bad. I'm telling you from my research, plus research coming out of Japan and Texas University, they've also just released a study. I've just done the study where if you shift your perspective and say, okay, I'm mad as hell. I'm just made such a mess. I'm this awful person. I'm screaming, shouting, but I embrace that. I accept it. I own it. As soon as you shift and say, okay, I'm doing this for a reason. I'm not just this. This is happening for a reason. I see this as helpful. Can you hear what I'm saying? So instead of, I'm actually saying, this is helpful. Let me look at myself. The argument with my daughter, this is helpful. It was a horrible argument, and it was unreasonable, but this is helpful. I embrace that. And then I look for the message behind it. Why did I do that? And how can I repair that situation? So what I got to that point first by doing the exercise, doing that 10-second pause, and you add a cognitive component to the 10-second pause. What you do is when you breathe in for 1, 2, 3, you also add the words think, feel. And when you breathe out, you add the words choose. So it's literally think, feel, choose. So you're breathing and you're speaking out loud or silently. When you combine the breath work with the cognitive, you rebalance the brain very fast. You drop the neurochemical chaos and the mental mess very fast. If you repeat that 6 to 9 times, so 60 to 90 seconds, it takes about that amount of time for a level of calm to come back in. If you can mix it with a bit of exercise too, and even things like, there's a lot of little things, tricks you can do. You can do some tapping, just like this, a little bit, those, just what I've just done now, in combination, or havening, which is just rub your arms. I mean, no one even needs to know what you're doing. You just like can do this. That sensation brings your body back in alignment and gets your physiology under control. You can do that. Everything I've just described, you can literally do in 60 seconds, in 60 to 90 seconds. You can be doing that breathing while you're jumping up and down or doing press ups or wiggling or walking, whatever you decide to do. Then once you've done that, you then move into the actual 5 steps, and you then go through the 5 steps. You embrace, you reflect, you write, you recheck, and you active reach. Okay, so the embracing is the gathering awareness, is gather awareness. Think of picking apples and putting them in a basket, or think of hugging your kids. It's a seeing that emotion is helpful. So my irritation or frustration or whatever with the argument with my daughter, I embrace that. And then I looked, what are my emotional warning signals? And they were the emotions of frustration, irritation, anger, whatever the list was. Then I looked at, okay, what are my physical warning signals? Tension in my body. My whole body had tensed up so much that my foot had gone to sleep in that few seconds in the car. And as I walked in, I realized, geez, my foot's got pins and needles, and it was the tension. So I focused in on, and then I got on this treadmill and I did, I did the breathing and the exercise. Okay, so the breathing and the movement and the gathering all sort of happened together. And then I was very aware, okay, what were my behaviors? I spoke like this, I did that, I did this. So I started tuning in, and I didn't see them as, I was very objective, very clinical, very therapeutic. I was using what I call the multiple perspective advantage, where you stand back and observe your own thinking. And so I distanced myself, and I was watching myself in the car, on the treadmill. Then I started the second step, which is reflect. Okay, why did I respond like that? What triggered that? And then I asked, answered, and discussed. And then I was on the treadmill, so I couldn't write, but normally you would write, but you can visualize. So if you're in a place where you can't write, you can actually visualize, because visualizing writes genetically in your brain. So then I re-visualized the entire scene. And I re-visualized and saw what I did, what she did. And suddenly I was able to pour this mental mess out into the visual imagery and see what really had happened. Then once I had poured it all out, I then did step number 4, I rechecked. I thought, okay, what actually went wrong here? She said this, but I was already worked up. I was already woke up feeling anxious about something in my business, and I was already quite triggered. She said something about the business. It was a very reasonable question, but it was her tone of voice and the way she used her body, on top of the way I'd woken up feeling, which shifted. So that was what I did in my recheck. I recognized that I had jumped into an old pattern of whatever. So in other words, my recheck helped me to clinically analyze why I had fallen into that. So then my active reach, which is an action, a full stop, it's something that you do to keep you in mental peace, was, okay, I acknowledge my role, what I did wrong. And by that stage, by the time I had got to saying that, I realized we were both saying the same thing, that we were actually arguing about the same thing. But I had no clarity initially. But then once I got clarity, I was able to see, okay, we were both saying the same thing. It was just the way she said it and the way I was already feeling that it triggered this response. So my active reach was, I caught her eye in the middle of because she was on the treadmill next to me, and we kind of both smiled at each other. Lo and behold, she was doing the same thing, because she knows she's trained in this. She works with my producer. And so by the time we got off the treadmill, we could not get to each other quick enough to say sorry. And she got it out first, and we then sorted it out driving home. So that was so you see, what could have been an awful situation, it could have gone on longer. I could feel myself justifying, she was justifying, whatever. We got it sorted out. And I mean, it could have gone the other way. And you may say, oh, you're the mom, she's the daughter, it's easy to do that, whatever, it's a friend. Listen, you can bring in every excuse in the book, but the fact of the matter is that just happened to me. Daily I'm using this, and those 5 steps you neurocycle all the time. What I've essentially just told you is that I got my mind under control with a mind technique. So deep down in the depths of who you are, your thinking, feeling, and choosing is your non-conscious mind, NON. non-conscious mind. It's the biggest part of you. It is the most intelligent part of you. It's dynamic. It's huge. We can use quantum physics to understand it. It's very scientific. It's all the beautiful you-ness. And the core of it is this wisdom, this baseline, this incredible insight. When you say things like, that's how I think, or when you have that inspiration, or you have a great conversation with your husband or friend, and you just get this depth of connection or something, that is you tapping into your unconscious mind. It knows what you can handle. Like you'll say things like, I can't get this, I can't do this anymore, and then suddenly you can do it. That's you pulling on the unconscious mind. So at the core of who you are, we have this beautiful wired for love component of our human nature. It's in our mind, and it's also wired into our brain. On top of that, we have this ability to think, feel, and choose. So we don't always listen to this wisdom of our unconscious mind. And we can get into these patterns that build. So we build on top of the healthy, normal, the baseline wisdom. We wire these things on top, and we create habits over 63 days, 9-week cycles, which you maybe didn't even know that, but we do it. We practice it and we practice it. And within 9 weeks, you've now created a lot of toxicity around the wisdom. And then these are the things that have got lots of energy, because whatever you think about the most will grow. So you're in a situation where you know you should listen to your daughter or your husband, or not get triggered by that social media post or what certain politicians have just said again that are just insane. And we respond from this instead of this. So what I'm saying is that when you use the 5 steps, you find these, you embrace them, and you actually find why. Because if you look at a tree, it's got roots. There's a tree trunk and there are branches. This is a tree that's generating a smell. All trees have got flowers. Think of a pine tree. It emanates, a smell comes from it. So those are the signals. So imagine that this is when flowers die, and you throw the water out and you throw them into the vase, it smells awful. That sulfuric smell. Okay, recall that smell. That's what these kind of things emanate, this awful sulfuric rotten egg kind of smell. And that smell, and I'm using that as an analogy, are the warning signals. So the depression and the anxiety are the warning signals. But instead of running away from the smell, you say, okay, it's a horrible smell, but hang on, I can make that a good smell. And you grab those, and those are the physical and emotional warning signals, the how you feel in your body, the how you're feeling in your emotions. You grab those, and then from those, you look at your behaviors. Where are the behaviors? The branches. So you see, this tree is made of branches. This tree is a thought. The thought is whatever. And a thought is made of memories, like a tree is made of branches. Look how many memories there are in this thought. So as you bring up one thought, there's a bunch of stuff you'll think of, a whole lot of stuff's going through your head, a whole lot of memories associated and correlated and integrated into that thought. So you don't just think of one thing, you're thinking of one tree, but the tree's got lots of branches. That tree's also got a perspective. So when you look at life through this, you generate a perspective. Life sucks. This is never going to work, whatever. What is the perspective? What's the overarching view of this thought? And then where does that come from? What are the roots? What's the origin story? What's the cause? So here you experience something. You have a relationship forming with a husband or a friend or whatever, or a work colleague, and you have a negative interaction. That's a seed that's planted. And then another one happens. So now it grows roots. And then here's all the negative interactions. And then they're happening over time. And within 9 weeks, you immediately grow all the branches, but it's only a few roots and a thin little thing and a few branches, and then next interaction, more roots, thicker branch, more, and so it grows and grows. Within 9 weeks, it's this habit. Habits don't take 21 days. That's just a myth. Habits take 63 days to form. Once a habit has formed, it goes into this non-conscious, this wise part of us, and we have this. And then this non-conscious mind, which is wired for survival, and survival is optimism and wanting to survive and get through. So then the non-conscious mind says, hey, this thing is creating toxic energy. Let's get rid of it. Like you want to get rid of a virus. So then this then sends signals through the subconscious. The subconscious is a bridge between the non-conscious and the conscious. So then your conscious mind, you're feeling edgy and you're feeling nervous, and there's tension, and you find yourself, saying all these things and doing whatever. That is a message from your non-conscious through your subconscious, and you need to pay attention. Most of the time we don't. We just flip out, or we freak out, or we just go on, or we push it back down, and we just kind of survive. And then we get weak and weak over time, and eventually we just start collapsing, and then we build coping strategies that aren't always, and so the cycle goes on. But we don't have to live like that. My situation with my daughter was restored within a few minutes. Okay, we only had a chance to talk about it an hour later, but it could have been, we know arguments, forget that if it be my daughter, it could have been a friend, it could have been my husband, it could have been whoever, a work colleague. We know that these relationships can break for a long time if you don't control it. You can get yourself in rumination and overgeneralization if you don't control it. So what I'm saying is that with the 5 steps, you can learn to recognize the odor. You can take that odor, not be frightened of it. And the odor is the warning signals. It's the depression, the anxiety, the tension in your body, the GI symptoms, the heart palpitations, the whatever. The physical things that are forming and happening. You can learn to recognize those for what they are, they're symptoms. And then you can look at your behaviors. How am I behaving? Why am I suddenly so much more irritable or overreactive? And then you look at all your behaviors, and this self-examination, the self-regulation is what we are designed to do. The minute you do that, you can still be in the midst of toxicity, still depressed, still snapping, still irritable, still whatever, but you've chosen to say, okay, why am I doing this? The minute you do that, your brain starts getting balance. If you don't do that, this causes brain damage. But as soon as I embrace it, which means that I gather awareness of it, I bring it into my conscious mind, I weaken all the protein bonds. This is made of protein in my brain. This is real. This is not some fictitious analogy. You actually build trees in your brain on your neurons. These things are called dendrites. They're made of protein. You're doing it right now at 400 billion actions per second. You're taking my words and you're growing trees in your brain. You have trillions of trees from every experience,
probably very bad
every moment. think of a huge. They're not dead. They're very alive, but they're scary. They're like super scary trees.
Though that one looks like a dead tree. Sorry,
I know. I know.
Dead tree.
It does. Well, it's a dead tree, but it's an alive dead tree. So think of it like one of those. Like a
positive. See, you're positive.
Well, I'm thinking of a Lord of the Rings. Think of those, the dead. They're very much alive, but they look dead. So it's an alive deadness. If you want to toxicity sort of.
That's how I feel. Alive deadness.
Yeah. There we go. So that's it's good. You just said it. Just by you acknowledging that, you've already embraced it. You've brought it into consciousness, and you've now weakened the protein bonds, which means it's malleable, which means it's changeable. But if it's suppressed and you just keep pushing it down and you think that you're bad, you make this worse. And then the symptoms become worse. You cause brain damage. But if you bring it up, just by the mere act of saying, I feel like that, you've already weakened the bonds and your brain's shifted. So the brain damage is starting to heal. You can start healing that damage within seconds just by the shift of attitude. And so as you do the work over 63 days of working through down to the roots, which is what you do, use the 5 steps daily over 63 days. Or the first 21 days, it's very intensive, and where you do 15 to 45 minutes a day. And then the next 42 days, it's literally 7 seconds a day. So it's really easy. You can then get to the bottom of that. Now, that doesn't mean that you do that 5 steps daily, 15 to 45 minutes over 21 days, and then 7 seconds a day for the next 42. That's your cycle. That's the neurocycle is the 5 steps. That's the time frame. You do that for toxic traumas, big stuff, small stuff. You do that for toxic habits. You do that for building a new good habit. Let's say that you want to, like the normal New Year's resolution, people want to eat better and exercise more and all that stuff, be nicer to their spouses or whatever it may be. That's building a new habit. You would use the 5 steps daily over 63 days. But you can also use them as a life hack, like I did with my daughter the other day, like I did with just recently. We had a terrible trauma in our family, in our extended family, and you can listen to it's my second last podcast where we had a suicide attempt in an extended member of our family, and I was in hospital with them, and it was like they were dying in front of me, and they survived. But that I was in a terrible place, as you can imagine, the whole family, but I happened to be the one that found them and got them to hospital. And I mean, this was like I died. It was terrible. In that situation, the only way I coped and stayed calm enough that they actually let me stay with this person, because suicide, they don't attempts, they kick any family members out. it doesn't matter who you are. And this is an extended family member. So you can understand it's even more difficult to stay in. I use a neurocycle. I did that breathing. I was walking around the hospital bed. I was holding, so I was moving, and I was managing to keep a calm enough face that they didn't kick me out and I could stay there. And that person said if I had gone, they would have died. I mean, that was that lifeline, that extension. How did I cope and stay calm and hold it together? Because this is a very, very dear person that I love dearly. I was neurocycling. And as I neurocycled, I got because I was so in such a state that my brain I couldn't think straight. So I knew that I had to breathe, I had to neurocycle so that I would get wisdom to control the situation. And I spoke to the right people and everything worked out okay. But in a situation like that, you can lose your loved one to the psych system. You can say the wrong thing. You can fall apart and move out the room, and that's the lifeline. You have to have your head on. In an acute, didn't mean I wasn't depressed, anxious. I was in a terrible state of despair, but I managed to still get myself through that situation. It didn't mean I wasn't crying. It didn't mean I wasn't freaking out. But I managed to keep my brain in order that I could actually get wisdom. I needed wisdom in that situation. And I got to, 15 hours later, we got out of there in one piece, and the person's on the other side of healing, thank God. But it was, so in other words, you can use this neurocycling because it is how you use your mind to manage your mind, to direct how you change your brain and your body.
So
your
would
brain's
this
neuroplastic.
would
That's a long answer, sorry.
No, absolutely. No, I wanted to ask you because I'm also wondering, does this technique help people who are having anxiety attacks, panic attacks? Because I know, like, for example, Tammin and I talk about this quite a bit on the podcast, is that we both have a fear of death. So oftentimes at night, we'll find ourselves lying awake, can't go to sleep. And then I start getting a little sweaty and then feeling
every night, same time.
Yep. Like clockwork, feeling like that death, like fear of death coming on, and it's probably even gotten worse since, we became
COVID.
But, so is that like a technique that you would use to suppress something or like not suppress, but to actually go through that kind of an experience?
Absolutely. So that's an excellent question. I'm so glad you asked that. So to help you understand how it will work, don't see it as a technique, but see it as a system. This is the system of how it's mind management. So what you're needing in that situation is not a technique. It's actually a system that then incorporates techniques. So what I teach the neurocycle that is in cleaning up your mental mess. And I've also got an app, by the way, that goes with this. It's called Switch currently, but it's changing to neurocycle like next month. And that I walk you through. So it's like therapy. I walk you through. You've got my voice and videos and everything, actually walking you through the process of that I've written up in the book. So yes, and there's even one in there in the app. There's one for panic attacks. So yes, it's the same 5 steps I've got for anxiety attacks, panic attacks. Because an anxiety and a panic attack, the fear of death is a root cause. If you have the fear of death, everyone's to a certain extent got a fear of death, but it's going to happen. It's certain. So as a parent, I know what you're saying. I mean, when you have kids, you suddenly think, how am I going to keep my kid in a bubble for the rest of their life so they never get in a car, never have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they just stay in a box the whole life so they don't ever, which is how we think, but you can't, it's not realistic. Every time you let your child, wait till your kids learn to drive and start going out and go to university. And it's bad enough when you just let them go to play school. And I mean, not that that's happening at the moment with COVID. So the fear of death is the thought, but there's a root. And it's got symptoms. Your symptoms are coming out as you're going to sleep. So what are those symptoms? The adrenaline rush, physical. You probably get a whoosh of adrenaline.
You're
sitting
same time. Sometimes I just go,
ah!
Isn't that so strange?
So it's not strange at all. That is just how your body is responding. So it's a physical warning signal. That scream is telling you there's something primal that you need to deal with. There's a reason why you've got this terrible fear of death. And honestly, it may sound so cheesy, but we actually have to learn to come to terms and come to peace, get peace with death, because it's going to happen. It's inevitable. And the fear of death that is keeping you awake, you basically see that that whoosh, that of adrenaline, that panic, that whatever it is, as the signal. Then you can look at your behaviors, which are not being able to sleep, or sleep's being affected. You've got to look down at your perspective. How is it affecting your general perspective of life? Is it overarching? Are you viewing life through the fear of death? And Then why? What are the root causes? So if you did the 5 steps daily over 63 days, and as I said, the first 21 days, it's 15 to 45 minutes, and then it's only 7 seconds to 10 seconds a day, you will find why. And you will reconceptualize, because what you'll do is embrace the fear of death. You'll process it and you'll reconceptualize it. The easiest way to understand this, I'll give you 2 visuals. The one visual is the kintsugi principle, which you may or may not know of. It's the Japanese art of when a beautiful vase falls to the ground and shatters in 1,000 pieces. Normally we would just sweep it away and throw it away. They don't. They will meticulously pick up every single piece and rebuild the vase using gold lacquer or platinum. And so eventually you have this beautiful new vase, and it's got all these veins of the gold lacquer. So it's the story of your life. So our lives feel shattered, and through the 5 steps of which is mind management, which we do we should train ourselves to do every 10 seconds, because that's what neuroscientifically you're doing anyway. So if you're not conscious, you could be doing it badly. So I'm trying to make people conscious of how to manage their mind all the time. You then can take the shattered pieces of your life, and our life shatters daily that's the mental mess, and rebuild that into this beautiful vase. So at the end of 63 days, you'll have this beautiful vase with all the cracks in it, which is your story of why you fear death, or why you've got that relational issue, and it tracks back to some sort of trauma or whatever that you've experienced. Reconceptualizing doesn't mean that this fear of death is just going to miraculously go away, but you're going to manage it. It's like grief. The person's gone, they've died. It's not going to get better over time. It's the worst thing we can say to someone who's just lost a loved one, or grieving through a loss of a pet or whatever, grief of loss. But over time, you learn to mind manage it. That's the difference. You learn to be able to reconceptualize it and see it in that vase. Another way of looking at it is, if you buy an ugly old house and you're going to renovate it, you buy this ugly old house, you can see the potential in your mind on the plan. And as you walk through, taking photos of the mold and the ugliness of the house and the terrible carpets and the design, and then it's bashed down, and then you have this beautiful new design, and you create this beautiful new house, and you have this beautiful new mental space. That's what these 5 steps are doing. These 5 steps are helping you create a mental space that you remember how the house looked, but you've now deconstructed and reconstructed. So we don't want to suppress anything, but we want to make it work for us. So these 5 steps teach you how to take that argument, take that frustration, take that fear of death, and make it work for you. It's real. Fear of death is going to probably be with you the rest of your life, but with this process, you'll learn how to manage it, that you can reconceptualize it and accept it and find mental peace. And that's what I'm talking about. It's unrealistic to say, if you're having a bad day, stand in front of the mirror and do 5 positive affirmations, or fill in your 5 gratitude statements. When I see that, I tear my hair out, because that will make you feel worse. If you don't have your root dealt with, if you don't go through the whole process of understanding why, the gratitude statements are a band-aid on a pussy wound, and that pussy wound is not going anywhere until you've addressed why the wound is pussy in the first place. So that's what I'm saying. We've got to fix the wound. We've got to go right to the core of why that wound is in your body, and it keeps festering, and you've got the boil that keeps festering. And I'm using a really gross example, but an oozing pussy wound, there is a reason why it keeps coming back. It may go away for a while with a bit of medication like fluconazole or something, and then it comes back again. There is something in your body that's wrong, and you have to find that. And very often the root of that kind of thing is some sort of a yeast infection in your gut, and you address that, and suddenly you don't have the boils anymore. And I mean, I don't know why that example came to my head, but anyway, it's a good one because it's visual. And that's what we need to do. But we remember we had that, and it's from time to time, you may do something or eat something, because just thinking toxically all the time increases your vulnerability. So if you've got a tendency to get boils, that means there's some genetic mutation in your body. And that means that if you're under extreme stress, there's a chance you'll get it again. So you may hide it on the outside, but it will come out somewhere in your body. And that's where in my clinical trials, I showed that with my 2 groups, my control, my experimental group. We looked at the psychology, we looked at the narrative, which is the most important, the person's story, the holistic story. We looked in the brain, we looked at the DNA, we looked at the blood, we looked at like a lot of different factors. And those people that were in the control group, which is the group that didn't get any mind management, they didn't get the neurocycle, their lives literally fell apart. I tell you, at the end of the 9 weeks, they were begging. They didn't know about the neurocycle, but they were begging for help. And we obviously gave them the app, the neurocycle app, so that they could manage their mind. But literally, if you have awareness of your issues, and we all to a certain extent have, and some of us are really good at suppressing, but eventually because thoughts are alive and living, even though they look dead. It's the dead alive, the alive dead, whatever you want to call them. These things are so active and so damaging to the brain and the body that even your DNA is going to change. So if you keep them and suppress them, think of the DNA strand, that ladder. Think of a chromosome, pull it out, and you'll have a little X shape. Look at my nails, they're red. The red nails represent the end of the chromosomes, which are called telomeres. Telomeres are vital for the health of a cell to replicate itself. Your cells are constantly replicating. Every moment of every day, there's close to 1 million replications happening in your cells at any 1 second. So you are constantly making new cells. The health of those cells is based upon the health of your little red fingernails, the telomeres. We see from recent research that your telomeres are literally the health, or a proxy for your mental health. In other words, the way you're managing your mind is going to be reflected in your telomeres. And we saw this. We did radical research, because over the years, they've thought that only took like 5 years to see changes in your telomeres. We saw changes in 9 weeks, which is like radical. And so what happens is that your cells are replacing themselves, and these little telomeres are involved in that process. If you are totally aware but not dealing with your stuff and just living in this constant cycle of rumination and, just not accepting and trying to suppress it, you are going to shorten the telomeres, and your biological age, the age of your cells, is going to get older than your actual age. So we had some of our subjects in the control group that their biological and chronological age were 30 years separated, up to 30 years. So we had 35-year-olds with biological bodies of 66, sickly 60-year-olds, which is insane. But in 9 weeks, we reversed that. We reversed that in 9 weeks. And how? Through mind management, through living in the neurocycle. So we had these are subjects, when the experimental subjects who got the techniques. I mean, some of them, because it's all random, it was all randomly, statistically, it's very gold standard. I did RCT, random controlled trials, very, very high level science. Our experimental group, some of them were like some of them were like suicidal. It was their last attempt. They had done everything. And they said, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to do. And if this doesn't work, that's it. I'm out of here. And we had those subjects, their lives were transformed. They would say things to us like at day 21, which is not even the whole cycle. It's only a third of the way, saying that I'm still depressed. Let me rephrase it. They said, I still feel depressed, but I've shifted from I am depressed to I feel depressed, and I know why I'm depressed, and I know how to manage my depression. That's very, very different to how they started at the beginning, which was I am depressed, I'm hopeless. Within 21 days, they were, I'm still depressed, but I'm not depressed. My identity is not depression. My identity is now shifted over to I feel depressed. I now am starting to see why, and I now can manage it, or anxiety, etc., etc. So we saw those changes in the brain. Your brain, your non-conscious mind, and your body will change before your conscious mind is aware. So I also developed a scale, which I talk about all of these in the book, and I make it very simple. You'll see if you look at the book that there's lots of graphs, and there's a section where I write about the clinical trials, but I make it very simple, and you don't even have to read the science, because there's a section that says all over the place, what does this mean for you? So if you skip all the science, just look at the colored pictures, and then what does this mean for you? You'll see, like, as simple as I've explained, the telomeres, what that means for you. It means that mind management is going to help you get stronger telomeres. And just by you saying, I'm not depression, I feel depressed because the telomeres started growing. But by saying I am depression, and I give up and I suppress, and I just go into a cycle of ruminating and just living my day, getting sick and hating life, the telomeres shortened. But by saying I still feel depressed, I still feel anxious, I'm still going to have days, but I know what to do, immediately the telomeres changed. The brain energy changed. The blood levels changed. We saw significant changes in cortisol. Now, we all know about cortisol. We all know cortisol, when it's high, it's not good for you, etc., etc. When your cortisol is high, your DHEA drops. And that ratio is very important for just mental stability. And so what normally happens when we're very toxic and we deny it, or we suppress it, or we don't deal with it, in other words, we don't mind manage, the cortisol levels will shoot through the roof, the DHEA levels will drop. That will then set up a cycle of inflammation throughout your body. So they will get things like homocysteine, which you might have heard of, increasing, and things like prolactin, which is, as mothers, you'll know prolactin is what we think only women have when they breastfeed. No, males and females have prolactin. It's a neurohormone, and it's more and more research is being done on it, and it's very linked to mind management, how we're managing our mind in any one moment. And we see that even that increases. But the minute someone can say, okay, I accept this, I embrace this, I am battling, my husband's sick, my child's sick, there's a threat of suicide, there's this pressure financially, life is just awful. The minute you say that, your telomeres start growing. But I don't, because I'm not saying life is awful and I can't cope. I'm saying I'm acknowledging it, I'm embracing it and saying, okay, but there's a big but. And the big but is, but I can learn to manage this. I can do something. Here's something, I can get my mind under control, whatever that looks like. So in the book, I have categorized into toxic trauma, so traumas, big trauma, small trauma. Small traumas are just as important. Big trauma would be like an event like a sexual abuse or a loss of a loved one, like really big hit in your face, obvious traumas. A small T or secondary trauma would be something like caring for a loved one. So, for example, my extended family who tried to commit suicide, they would have experienced trauma, and then we experienced the trauma too, but also a level of all of us are now in secondary trauma that we're dealing with. Does that make sense? If you're constantly bullied, that's lots of little traumas that are building up to a big trauma. So it's not that one is worse than the other. It's just that they're different, but they play out in the brain and they need to be dealt with. If they're not dealt with, they're causing brain damage because your brain is wired for love and survival. So it tries to get rid of these. So in the one section of the book, I help you to identify the traumas and how to detox the traumas over the 63 days. And sometimes traumas are so bad that you're going to need 20 of these cycles. I don't know. There's no pattern.
And people don't want to go over their traumas. I think that's
they don't want to.
That's why they suppress, because they don't want to live. Just say someone was sexually abused. Why would you ever want to fix that? But the problem is, if you don't fix it, or if you don't get down there, then it's just going to consistently be with you, and you're not going to live your best life. So it's like you have to go to that place.
You have to. It's like when you have surgery, if you've got a need for surgery for something. My whole pelvic floor collapsed after having 4 kids, and I had no option but to have surgery. And it was very complex surgery that they did over constantly over 4 years. I just couldn't seem to fix it. But I was in so much pain for large periods of time, but then now I'm healed. So in other words, when you face the stuff and you embrace process, and it gets worse before it gets better. It's scary looking at this. And that's why people do try and suppress. You're quite right, but you can't, because they're living in dynamic. Even though they're the living dead, they will explode in your body. You cannot ignore the broken pelvic floor, the pussy boil, the sexual trauma. It will explode. Eventually, you will get to the point where your body will collapse in some way. Wherever there's a genetic flaw in your family bloodline, that generally will get hit first, and then you'll get a bunch of other stuff. So it will explode. So you may as well take control. And that's what I saw with my research and my years of clinical practice and stuff, is that there's a pathway to empowerment. It's very painful. The only way out is through. And as you face it, it will get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. The whole point is you want to give people control. And that's what I've seen in my research, what I've seen in my practice, what I've seen in my own life, and working with thousands of people now, we reach millions around the world, is that when you are prepared to embrace and do that painful work and recognize there's time, the 9-week cycles, the 63-day cycles, you will get through it. You suddenly have this empowerment where you are feeling autonomy, which is a sense of independence. People collapse when they feel hopeless. If you get told you have a neuropsychiatric brain disease and you're going to have it the rest of your life, that takes away hope. And meanwhile, that person maybe was a child who comes from drug addict parents and was dumped in an orphanage and was never loved and was never fed, whatever. And now that child's manifesting with problems, and then they get told they have schizophrenia and they've got to take medication. That's not that child's, you're making it the child's fault. It's not their fault. They have a story, and the story needs to be addressed. And yes, there's the manifestation of the behavioral symptoms and so on, but those need to be addressed. They're just a symptom of the underlying. But we're taking the symptom and we're making it the disease, and then we don't treat the person and in their whole story. And that's what I'm trying to help people to understand, is that we've got to look at the whole person. And here's a hardcore scientific way that you can manage your mind in the acute traumas, in the big traumas, in acute trauma. Like acute traumas, if there's a sudden death, if there's a sudden suicide, if there's a sudden loss of finances, if there's the stuff that blindsides you, that's acute trauma. That's different to big trauma and little trauma. So I talk about how to manage those, how you can preemptively build those lattices into your brain and your mind. There's also dealing with things like bad habits, toxic habits. We just develop toxic habits. And those also are damaging to the brain. They're causing brain damage. They're causing damage to every cell of your body. So I talk about how to deal with those. I talk about how to brain build, which is one of the most misunderstood and the strongest ways of healing mental health. Every single patient that's ever gone through my hands, the first thing I would do was brain building. And that was the same 5 steps. But instead of dealing with the traumas, I first made them stronger. I didn't make them, it's the wrong way of saying it. I first taught them how to make themselves stronger in their mind and their brains more resilient. So brain building is learning new information. The brain building section in this book, you can learn and you can use it with your kids, and you can teach your kids. It's basically, you can use this. They've got to learn their schoolwork. They've got to learn skills. You can use the 5 steps to learn. And in learning, you're building your brain. You yourself can do it. As you prepare for a podcast, as you prepare you can use the 5 steps to learn. So there's the brain building aspect too, which builds tremendous changes inside the brain that increase your mental resilience. So it's that's why it's the first in the second part of the book. It's all the practical how to manage your mind. Brain building is the first thing. Like you clean your teeth every day and you eat every day and you exercise. You have to brain build. I brain build for 2 hours. There's no limit to the amount of time you brain build. I will brain build in chunks of at least 2 hours a day where I study science related to my field. But then I also brain build like when I read the news. I don't just read the news. I scan and then I find certain articles and I compare. I use the 5 steps. I'm always brain building. Then I talk about things, the different traumas and whatever. And then I have hacks, like if you're caught in the moment, like that argument with my daughter, someone sends you a text that's awful and you just get thrown by those words. What do you do in that moment to catch yourself? So you can use those 5 steps in 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 45 minutes. It's how you manage your mind. You're always thinking. So my argument, as I said in the beginning, if you're always thinking, you may as well direct how you think, because when you think and feel and choose, you're going to build these physical thoughts into your brain. And these are results.
Does this take the place of traditional therapy and medication for somebody who's like struggling or dealing with something? Like, does this process sort of like take over from that?
So I'm so glad you asked that question. You ask great questions, by the way, both of you. That it doesn't take over therapy. Therapy, you'll see throughout the book, I encourage, and throughout my apps and throughout all the neurocycles that I have built into the app and throughout my lives, my podcast, I always encourage people to find someone to talk to. We're not meant to be. Quantum physics shows us very clearly it's not about you. It's about you in the world. We need that contact, like you two are friends. You help each other. That is in a form of, in itself, therapy. Your formal therapist, I mean, they specialize. It's great to go and see your therapist once a week or twice a week. They are a godsend. Therapists, I work with so many therapists. I've trained thousands of therapists. I've trained thousands of physicians. So no, it doesn't replace therapy because it's a system. It's how you manage your mind. So what do you do if you go to therapy once a week? What are you doing the other 6.5 days? What are you doing for 24? You're living with yourself 24/7. How do you manage your mind 24/7? So your therapy is your little booster, in the week. It's your culmination. So I have thousands of therapists that have their patients using the techniques in my book and on the app, because I've written, this is my 19th book. It's the most simple explanation of all of this and the most updated version. But that their patients are using this stuff. I've got clinics around the world. So into this system, it's a vehicle for how you manage your mind, to change your brain, to direct your neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is how you change your brain with your mind. And so you can put, like every therapist is going to have their techniques that they've developed. Some of they use mixtures of CBT and ACT and all these fancy names are little tools, but they're not enough on their own. And if you use them in the wrong place, they won't work for you. So all the little exercises and things generally would come either in a brain prep, like I spoke about breathing and havening, which is the touching or the movement, that's the brain prep, or they come in the active reach. The middle part is the process of how you are actually accessing and building. So I want people to recognize you're human, you've got a mind, you can't get away from your mind, you may as well manage it. And as you hit your crises, you can recognize, hey, I'm in a crisis. I need to see a therapist. I need to talk to a loved one. I need to just this afternoon, I was walking in for a walk with my one daughter, my youngest daughter, in between a million interviews. And slight exaggeration there. I don't think I could put a million interviews in a day. And
we do.
Always, every day.
Always working, okay?
Yeah, always working. So I know I identify with you. But we went for a walk and she was just saying, Mom, is it a good time now for me to talk to you? So she recognized in herself that she just wanted to talk about something. And I said, yeah, this is a great time. We're walking, so let's talk about it. In other words, it's the preemptively being able to process through and recognize. So, my kids are so trained in this that they do it automatically, that they recognize the signals and they start like automatically going through in 5 seconds, and then they recognize they need to talk to someone, that kind of thing. So that's an example. So it doesn't replace. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's like, with our children, I mean, today I snapped at my 7-year-old and I felt like, today it wasn't really a fight. It was more just I exploded. I'm actually proud of myself that I went up to her and after 2 minutes, I got down to her level and I said, I'm so sorry.
Fantastic.
I said, I'm so sorry. I am so overwhelmed. I need you to help me. And what happens when you don't help me is I feel like we're not feeling well. I just need you to be there for me like I'm there for you. And I didn't feel good that I had snapped at her, but I was proud of myself that I had come and apologized, because I think back in the day, like our parents and their parents and their parents, like it was just kind of like,
different.
Your parents were kind of, you're kind of scared of them in a way, they would be like, no, this is wrong. And you'd never really talk through it. And you'd never really hear like, I did something wrong. So I guess like as parenting kind of changes and evolves, it's like, I want my daughter to know that I fuck up too, and then maybe what happens is in the future, she will realize when she does it to her children that she'll go, oh, okay, my mom is not perfect and she also screws up. So I don't know.
That was you did a 5-step neurocycle without even realizing it, because you recognize your symptoms, you recognize your signals, you actually evaluated your behaviors, you saw your perspective, you found the root, and you actually then your active reach was you basically did it. You gathered awareness, reflected, visually wrote, whatever, rechecked, and you went to her, and your active reach was this active apology. So you turned something that was potentially brain damaging into healing. So you did that. So, I mean, that's what and as you quite right, there's 2 things happening here. One thing, yes, parenting has changed. I grew up saying, my mother used to say, why are you apologizing to your children? I said, because I've done something wrong. If I've done something wrong, we need to recognize in the messiness of relationships, you can then repair and grow. And that's what you did today. You recognize the messiness of the relationship. I recognized it with my daughter the other day. You can repair and you can grow. So you don't have to feel guilt about feeling bad. You can feel celebratory because you recognized, you fixed, you taught her a lesson, you learned something, you're enriched from the relationship. There's been growth in the relationship and you've taught her a skill. If we don't fall as parents, how are we ever going to teach our kids to not cope? There's a whole group of baby boomers that are battling with dealing with life, very similar sort of symptoms. And I don't like to generalize and put people in a box, but they came from an era where you didn't ever get apology. Your parents were always right and you were always wrong. And you didn't speak about those things. You just like survived, you just lived. And that is not a healthy situation. What you did, what I did with my daughter, that's what we should be doing. We don't have to be perfect because we are mom. We have to be human. And we, at the core of us, there is that perfection. So you dive down and you found your perfection in that situation today. And that's what I'm talking about in this whole thing. Whatever situation, you didn't even realize it, but you basically did those 5 steps. But you managed your mind.
How do you take that though? Because like Tiamat said earlier, our kids are, 6 and 7 years old. And she even has a younger one that's 2. But like when we're in these sort of situations, how do you train them to use these 5 steps? Like, what is the way?
A lot of it's coming from modeling. So like what you did with your daughter today, when you said, that process when you explain to her that I'm battling, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm sorry about a snack, but this is why I did it. You've actually done the fight. You've actually shown them. You've shown them that you were aware. So you gathered awareness of your reaction. You then showed them how you reflected. You actually said you did this because of this. So the second step is ask, answer, discuss. It's why. So you are verbalizing, I did this, gather awareness. I did it because, reflect. You talked and explained, and with kids you could draw pictures, you can do, there's a system of writing that I call metacogs, and with younger kids it's called bubble cogs. It's in the book, and in the if people pre-order, there's actually a chapter coming out for kids, and I've got a kids version coming out as well. There's a whole children's book and app and everything coming out. It's in the process of being written, but there is already help there. But you basically can use props and toys and whatever their age appropriate. The younger the child is. My youngest patient has been a 2 and a 3-year-old. My kids have learned this from the age of 2. I've been teaching them basic, you speaking for them, and it's props and it's drawing and it's dolls and toys and things when they're younger. But if they bite their sister or brother or something, then there's crying, whatever, you can show them through props and basic explanations of, let's see what we did, why did we do it, images, props, whatever, for the right section. And then for the recheck section is, okay, is that the best way? Should we bite when we're frustrated? I'm going on that level. Or that wasn't my best response, but I need you to help me. That's recheck. When you said that's your daughter, you did a recheck. And then the active reach was probably a hug and let's work at this together. And so now you've got a little plan. You've actually demonstrated for your children that you've got that little plan in place. So there's literally, you can take trees and you can take a tree and draw a tree and say, okay, so what's the smell coming out? What do you feel in your body? What do you feel in your mind? And you might have to verbalize the emotions. Okay, let's look at the little branches. What are you doing? What am I doing? Whatever. And then you can take the tree trunk. How does it make you, how are you looking at things? I don't like my sister, or I hate you, or whatever. That's their perspective. Why do you feel like that? Okay, let's look at the roots. Let's see how we plant the seed. You could even grow a tree if they're young. You can really get creative, but it's just to get them into that sequence of flowing through those steps. If they grow up like my kids now, my youngest is nearly 23. It's just a life. They're doing it automatically. They've grown up with it. And I've refined over the years, and as I've refined it, I've obviously taught them the most updated level of it. But it's habit. It's become automatized over 63 days plus.
Well, we could talk to you for probably 6 more hours. I didn't even
Never
I looked at the time and I was like, oh my gosh, it felt like 2 minutes. I was like, when you're really into something like a movie, and you're like, how is it over?
Yeah.
I know. And it's 8:10. My goodness, I didn't even realize.
My child came out naked. I was like so glad she wasn't in the back of this podcast. And she's like, comes out and gets a block of chocolate. And I can't say anything because we're live. So she just walks in naked, takes some chocolate and walks out because she's smart. She's manipulative and she's smart.
So she knew. So then you can do a 5-step with her. When you can give it goes, this is what you did. And this is,
yeah. The other day I said, you just manipulated me. And she goes, I don't know what manipulated means. And I said, well, manipulated means that you'll do something and you'll try different tactics to get it. And you'll do anything to try to get it. And she goes, yeah, you're right.
There you go.
And then my husband's like, well, who did she get it from? And I'm like, me. Yeah, it's me.
I thought you were going to say you.
No, it was me. It was me. I'm the one who used to. I'm much better now. But like, I try to do anything I could. I used to just call it like, I don't know, trying to be a businesswoman. You kind of just have to do whatever which way to get it.
Yeah.
But so how do people, I know there's a lot of different ways that people can find you. Tell us everything people can read, listen to, go to. I know you have seminars. I don't know if you're doing them now online. Just tell us where people can find you.
Well, the easiest way is just to go to drleaf.com, my webpage, because everything's on there. The book is on I'm not sure when this book is released on the 2nd of March. So I'm not sure if it's the podcast when they hear this is out or not, but basically it's on pre-order now, and you can go to Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. That's the name of the book, cleaningupyourmentalmess.com or drleaf.com, or wherever books are sold, and they can pre-order that or get that. My podcast is called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, where I talk about all these things all the time and also interview guests. Social media, Dr. Caroline Leaf is my handle. Every day we put out 2 to 3 posts related to these concepts. So great place to get lots of help.
Well, I feel like I'm already fixed, and I
will change the whole evening. Change the whole evening.
All my trauma has gone since this last hour and a half. I will be nicer to my family members.
But it doesn't, Tamara, don't you think that it does seem manageable to employ this process, I feel like it could be something that becomes a habit, you know?
Yeah. Look, I've been in therapy for many years, and I probably suffered anxiety for 20 years. And I do believe that these types of, you might not call it CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's kind of a form of it.
It's a technique. Yeah.
It's a technique. It does work. The problem is life happens sometimes. And unless you are, like you said, doing it consistently and constantly for X amount of time and it becomes a habit, what happens is you start to slide. And I feel like my emotional and mental state definitely starts to slide when I'm not not working on it, you know?
And that's okay. But CBT would fit in as in step 5. It's techniques that you can use to keep you going. But if you haven't done the other 4 steps, it's not going to work properly. It'll be just sporadic help. But if you fit CBT, and all these things as an active reach and action. It's a technique but it's got to come after you've done the brain preparation and the other 4 steps. Then Definitely. It'll work.
So I'm buying the book.
Yeah. We're going on pre-order
Everyone needs to buy the book. And we're just so grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you responded to my DM while I was in the bathtub a couple months ago. And I feel like everything happens for a reason. So thank you so much for giving so much wisdom to our listeners. And you can find us on Women on Top Official on Instagram.
And Women on Top Podcast on Facebook. And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and comment, y'all, because we want to hear everything you guys have to say. And we want to keep bringing you amazing guests and content like
you threw in a y'all because I'm in Austin and Caroline's in Texas. So you're just like, felt like you're back there.
I am. I'm like feeling my Texas.
I heard that.
Yeah, you haven't thrown in a y'all for like years, Roxy. Okay. So don't, you're not fooling anyone. And I am Tammin Sursak.
And I am Roxy Mandy.
And we are Women on